All right, what's up, everyone? Mr. Shea here, along with Glorious T, and we are looking at perhaps my most ambitious homework video of all time. So, without further ado, let's check out turning point number 3 in modern American history, the Great Depression and the New Deal. But wait, before we do that, quick shout out to all you humans out there that have been generous enough to subscribe, which is very nice of you. Look at that. Check it out. We're at 500. It's a great day. We're at 501. Who knew? Years ago when I launched the Flipped History YouTube channel, we'd be at 500 subscribers. What a day. What a year. What a life. 2020, y'all. It's getting crazy. All right. Speaking of crazy, let's start this off. I'm going to time myself so that we don't go incredibly long, but let's kick it. So, quick recap where we've been so far this year with our turning points. First off, we looked at the election of 1896, which pitted, as you see here, William McKinley versus William Jennings Bryan. William McKinley was victorious in this election, which really kicked off an era where business, here we have Andrew Carnegie trying to show the people, Uncle Sam here, that these large businesses are nothing to be afraid of. They are, in fact, helping the nation. So we have this focus by Republican administrations on supporting big business and helping the United States economy grow. We do have a rise in labor unions at this time as workers are saying, well, the government isn't going to step in and help us, so we will help ourselves. Workers are also many women, and women are empowered to fight for the right to vote. So we see this huge push for women's suffrage, which ends up being victorious. But remember, it is in many ways white women who are winning the right to vote. And this is an era of intense segregation in the United States, as well as anti-immigration feelings. The election of 1896 and the era that follows that encompasses World War I, which in many ways is a classic European war, where the purpose of the war is in many ways misunderstood by the combatants themselves, the soldiers themselves. The United States does get involved in this European conflict, much to the disagreement with many of the philosophical views of war that the United States had at this time against militarism, that Americans were kind of tired of war in Europe, which is why they came to the United States. However, the United States does get involved with the sinking of the Lusitania, and after the war, it really shapes the United States economy, and it shapes the United States foreign policy. And the United States is a bit more willing to engage outside of its own borders and start to become a world power. Economically, because of the impacts of the war, the United States is doing so well. We roll into the Roaring 20s, where women have a lot more freedoms because of the economic growth in the country and their independence. We see prohibition happening, but people say, well, we still want to drink, so we are going to launch these speakeasies. And the culture of the 20s is great fun in many ways. The war was so hard, and America embraces the prosperity that the economy has brought to them, and it comes crashing down. So, Great Depression. By the name of it, it is very true to very much what happens in the country. So let's look at what caused the Great Depression first. Overproduction. All these factories that are working after the war, instead of producing military goods, start turning their attention to consumer goods. People have more money in their pockets. They want more things. However, many of those things that people buy, you only need one of them. You don't need to replace them. So surplus of cars, washing machines, these consumer products are created that there's no one to buy them. Once they go unsold, the ripple effect on the economy starts to happen of the workers in the factories are getting unemployed because they don't need to produce any more goods. The salespeople at stores that are selling these goods no longer have employment because no one's buying them. So you start seeing this ripple effect from overproduction. We have banks across the United States who, without great regulation by the federal government, take the money that the people are depositing in the banks and they invest that money in high-risk stocks. Because that's how banks work in some regards. You don't just deposit your money in the bank and it just sits there and does nothing. Banks reinvest it in loans, and in this case, in risky investments. Some of those investments worked, others didn't. So the banks whose investments didn't play out, they shut down. And the people that deposited money in those banks, that money was lost. While regular people were impacted, people that were investing in the stock market were engaged in a practice called buying on margin. And that allowed people to borrow money to invest. So by 1929, as it says here, 90% of all trades were on margin. So if you are an investor and you're just borrowing money, in many ways you don't care as much as if it were your own. My students, we've been investing fake money in the stock market. I mean, some of you've lost thousands of dollars, but hey, it's fake. And not to say this money wasn't real, but in many ways it's not as, you don't have that attachment to it as if it were your own. So stocks are being artificially inflated. The prices are going much higher than perhaps they should be. So stock market crashes October 22nd, 1929, becomes known as Black Tuesday. And what happens is investors lose confidence in the stocks. They lose confidence in the businesses and they lose confidence in the economy, that all of the production and all of these goods are going to be sold and these factories are going to stay open and Americans are going to have money to buy. In one day, they lost, in that era, $30 billion. In today's money, or 2018 money, that's $415 billion in one day disappeared. And with that economic collapse, the United States, in order to protect those businesses that are collapsing as well, they put in place a tariff. And what a tariff does is it increases the prices of foreign goods, intending to promote American goods. If foreign goods are more expensive, the belief would be Americans would buy American-made goods, helping American businesses. The problem with a tariff is that other countries can do the same. So when the Smoot-Hawley Tariff was put into place, the partners of the United States decided that, well, they're going to put tariffs on American goods, and it incredibly dramatically cut trade. So not only was the domestic economy struggling, then suddenly the United States, which after World War I started as a major trade partner in the world, that collapsed. So what then is the impact? Number one is unemployment. United States unemployment grows at various points to 25%. 1 out of every 4 Americans is unemployed. People lose their homes. And what we have here, some images here, is Hoovervilles. So Herbert Hoover is the president as the U.S. economy collapses. And as this kind of snarky trolling of Hoover, they named these shantytowns after him, which are outside of major industrial cities. We have people, since they are unemployed, they are homeless. We have soup kitchens and bread lines that are formed so that people simply have enough food to eat. Organizations like the YMCA, they turn their attention to feeding people. And a lot of these organizations and churches step in place because the government itself is not willing to put into these programs themselves. And we have criminals that do it. Al Capone here, he starts soup kitchens, which helps boost his perception in Chicago especially. And at the end of this video, we'll talk about, remember, when there's a problem, when there's an issue, when there's fear in Americans, sometimes you forget the true character of the people you turn to. And the United States turns to eventually the right person, but other countries do not do the same. They are deceived by people like Capone, who simply are doing this in many ways for power. At the same time of this, we have a massive environmental disaster in the Midwest. the Dust Bowl. After years of over-farming, after years of depleting the nutrients from the soil and not allowing the farm fields to rest, the topsoil of the Midwest, if you look in this map up here, literally blows away. And that creates a massive migrant farmers that travel especially to the West Coast. And you have not only unemployment, but now the breadbasket of the United States has collapsed. So coupled with the stock market, coupled with industry, we have the farmers themselves who are out of their livelihood, out of their homes, out of their estates. With all this turmoil, people simply just give up. And what you see are hobos. And hobos are predominantly men who have left their homes, left their families, because they've seen that they can't help. And that lack of power is crippling for many. And instead of dealing with it, they escape. And they ride the rails and travel around the United States, simply from place to place and trying to survive. We have women and children, as mentioned just now, many men, abandoned families. And we have women and children who are suffering and traveling and trying to really just survive. Education falls by the wayside. Children are asked to work. And we have this step back from progress. I think sometimes we think that history always gets better. It's not true. There's periods of time where we slip back. And especially for women who in the 1920s were much more empowered after they gained the right to vote economically, they had independence and jobs. And a lot of those freedoms and the successes that women earned disappear almost overnight. Which results in, there's a reason why it's called the Great Depression. The social and psychological effects are massive of a nation that very much had seen itself as moving forward, and it's a modern nation, drops down. And that hurts. That's painful for people to have to accept that life is no longer good. And it causes a traumatic experience for everyone involved in here. So the question for Americans is, what's next? What do we do? And Herbert Hoover initially was unwilling to use the federal government to institute widespread change. He was under the belief that the economy would regulate itself, and that in many ways this was an aberration, a unfortunate but short-lived something that will go away. And it didn't go away, and he was not going to win the presidency. Whereas the person that does win the presidency is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is this man right here. Now, Franklin Roosevelt was born to wealth. He's a New Yorker, a relative of the former president, Theodore Roosevelt, and he rises pretty quickly politically, becomes governor of New York. And while he's a relatively young man, he is stricken by polio, which paralyzes him from the waist down. He is unable to walk without assistance for the rest of his life. And that doesn't really hinder him. And the press, the news people, the people taking photographs recognize that despite the physical limitations he has, he is still doing great things. And they, in fact, choose not to portray him as weak. They choose not to share many of those photographs of Roosevelt. And Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, is in many regards one of the most powerful second ladies ever in American history, and is brilliant in her own mind. And really, the two of them work together and support each other in the midst of the worst crisis the United States had seen since the Civil War, which was important because Franklin Roosevelt, when he's elected, is in the midst of the Great Depression. So what's he do? Well, number one, he talks to the people. people are scared. People are legitimately depressed. And he goes on the radio and he starts putting into place these fireside chats where he explains what has happened to the country and he talks through what he's intending to do about it. And he's intending to do a lot. In the first 100 days of his presidency, he puts into place an enormous collection of programs attempting to really just try everything. And he has this real belief that it's not grounded in his party's beliefs. It's not grounded in a system. It's grounded in the idea that we're just going to try. And if it fails, it fails. But if it works, it does work. Some of the programs that he puts into place are utter failures. They are unconstitutional. They just don't work. But other programs we still have today. The FDIC, if you go into any bank now, you will see that the federal government has insured your deposits in the bank. And that is a program that has great legacies. So he wants to attack the Great Depression in three ways: reform, relief, and recovery. And relief is the first one, in that he just simply wants to make sure that people have food, people have housing, and that they're able to survive. He uses the federal government to distribute food. He uses the government to make sure that people have the basic necessities of life. With recovery, not only do we need basic necessities, but we need to feel good about ourselves. We need to feel that we are accomplishing something. And during the Great Depression, people didn't have that feeling. So with recovery, it's very much trying to get people jobs. He wants to get people back on their feet and feeling empowered. And with reform, the third part of the New Deal, which is what this program becomes known as, he wants to ensure that this does not happen again, that the mistakes that were made, that the flaws in the system are not going to repeat themselves so we do not have another Great Depression. And the collection of all of these programs for the years of his presidency, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is elected 4 times to the presidency. He very much changes the whole history of American politics in that, and afterwards they change it so that you can only have 2 terms in office. Before this, that was not a limitation. So what Franklin Delano Roosevelt does with the New Deal is he ushers in what's known as the fifth party system. And the fifth party system, if you look here, I'm blocking the dates, but with Democrats and Republicans, they take over. The Democrats do across the nation. And the Republicans that focus on big business, the focus on industry, it collapses because the American public is disenchanted by it. They see the destruction that a unhinged and untethered business can do to the country. And really for the next up until the 1960s, this is what the map looks like. Democrats having immense power because the reaction to the mistakes of the Republican Party is so strong. And in many ways, you don't see a business person that is elected into a high level of government until the 70s. So this is a dramatic change for the American people of they really decide collectively to distrust business, to distrust these owners of industry, because they see them as greedy and they see them as not out for the best interests of the nation. And instead, they turn to Roosevelt, who says, let's use the government for the collective good of the people. And once again, to great failure in many regards, but also to great success. Other nations are not isolated from the Great Depression. They also suffer. The whole world economy collapses. And some nations turn in that fear, in that confusion, to dictators. And the reaction then was what we're going to look at this week. We want to look at the consequences of the New Deal, but also how did these men, Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin, how did they gain power and go on to do horrific things in World War II? So that's what we're going to be looking at this week, my students. We are going to be looking at the impact of the New Deal today, as well as the rise of dictators, which leads into World War II. So Thank you for this epically long video. Shout out to everyone for subscribing. And we will catch students in class on Tuesday. And everyone else on the YouTube lands, we will catch you the next video. Until then, have a glorious day. Peace out.